Colonialism doesn't just take your land, it takes your mind as well. And the British Empire had a clear strategy on this one. Force and enforce English and make people ashamed of their culture and their language. Two tactics. With British colonial power, there's always the same two tactics, right? You've got your hard power, so hard enforcements, the rules, the punishments, the laws, the brutality. And then the soft power, which is often forgotten about, which is the psychological manipulation and the propaganda. And a lot of internalized shame. And it worked. Generations of Irish and other Celtic and other nations across the world grew up thinking that their own language wasn't valuable. This is exactly what happened in my family. My grandfather was a native Irish speaker. He was from Spittal, Connemara, and he came to Dublin when he was 16, and it was then that he started to speak English.
What's up, my good people? Welcome back to the channel. I hope you're doing good from wherever you're watching me from. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. And thank you very much for sparing your time, your valuable time, to pass by this channel to check on what we have for you today. And for sure, I have something very interesting for you. We have two agendas in this video today. The main agenda is what we have to discuss about in this video, and I have some good news coming up at the end of towards the end of this video rather. So please stay tuned in until the end of the video to get the good news. So without wasting so much of your time, let's talk about language and culture as a tool of subjugation and colonialism from a perspective of Black people. You know that Black people are the center of our channel. So let's watch this video by this white sister. Let's learn a lot. It's a very deep video. Take your pen, your paper, and let's just get into this class. At the end of this, then we will add our voices to the same. My pen is here. My book is right here. Let's go into this class. So right here is the video.
Colonialism doesn't just take your land, it takes your mind as well. And the British Empire had a clear strategy on this one. Force and enforce English and make people ashamed of their culture and their language. Two tactics. With British colonial power, there's always the same two tactics, right? You've got your hard power, so hard enforcements, the rules, the punishments, the laws, the brutality. And then the soft power, which is often forgotten about, which is the psychological manipulation and the propaganda. And a lot of internalized shame. And it worked. Generations of Irish and other Celtic and other nations across the world grew up thinking that their own language wasn't valuable. This is exactly what happened in my family. My grandfather was a native Irish speaker. He was from Spittal, Connemara, and he came to Dublin when he was 16, and it was then that he started to speak English. But when he had my father, he didn't pass that on. And my father has zero Irish. I asked my grandmother, who's still alive, why, and she said, well, we just thought it had no value for them. We lived in Dublin, nobody spoke it, so you can imagine for them, I guess, who were they speaking Irish for? Is only for my grandfather's parents who had passed away. That was what their minds, that's how they felt in their minds. They didn't see the bigger picture. They thought the language was useless, they thought that it was dead. And I wish that my grandfather could see all the lovely TikToks and the people speaking and learning and teaching Irish on this app, because he'd be so proud. The British didn't do that just to the Irish though. In Wales, children caught speaking Welsh in school had to wear this lovely plaque that said Wales not for the whole day. And if by the end of the day the child had still this around their neck, they'd take a beating. This made Welsh children terrified to speak their own language. The internalized shame of being beaten every time you use your language. We have a vibrant community of Gael schools in Ireland now. For a long time, Irish was outlawed in schools, and we were also beaten as children for using it. Over time, people start to associate Celtic languages with poor, uneducated Philistines. And you know where that word came from. When they went to India and Africa, at first they did allow you to use your native language for one thing. You could read the Bible in it. Once you were converted to Christianity though, no more language for you. Once the punishments and restrictions were in place, this created a nasty feedback loop that we're still trying to work through. Parents stopped even teaching their children the languages because they thought that they would hold them back. And increasingly, English was embraced as the language of business, and more over generations, parents felt that they must equip their children with English so that they can be successful. That's why English is the most spoken language in the world. It is not the most successful language in the world. It just speaks volumes to the brutality of the British Empire, that they forced that many people to give up their culture. So then what you have emerging in the 20th century is that speaking English becomes a status symbol. Speaking your native language is a sign that you are backwards. And so over time, people didn't need to be forced to speak the language. They did so willingly, thinking that this was a smart choice. And that is the ultimate success of colonialism, when you can get the people to police their own self from your internalized colonial mind. This is still happening. We are still fighting this. Globalism is the new colonialism. Local languages and cultures continue to be erased, except instead of the British, it's the American Empire, and instead of military force, it's corporate power. One of the first ways to resist colonization is to take back your own language skills. Má tá cúpla focal nó níos maithagat is féidir leat Gaeilge a labhairt.
Well, I guess you didn't understand the last part of that video. I didn't understand it either, but I feel it. I think I felt that. That's so a deep a video, and very informing. So let me tell you something. So in my country, Kenya, just a few years ago, while in fact I was already an adult, is when we did a constitutional overhaul. Kind of like we tried to come up with our own constitution. That is apart from what the imperialist and the colonialist left behind. And it's when we actually incorporated Swahili as a language, as now a recognized, accepted official language, which I can tell you for sure that even after that, to date, it still feels a bit like, yeah, you can't use that in our parliament, you can't use it in official spaces, you can't use it in official businesses, so on and so forth. There's still a difficulty into using it. And going back when I was growing up as a kid, during our formative, young years in school, I remember very well that we were literally forced with a cane to speak English throughout the day. In pre-primary to primary school to high school, the language of the day is English, left, right, and center. And it was a shame if you found or caught speaking in your vernacular or a national language like Swahili. In the case of Kenya, you know that Swahili is spoken almost across the entire of East Africa. It's a huge language. But if you are caught speaking that language or your vernacular or any other African language, you're marked. We used to pass a disc. It used to be called a disc. So you carry it in your pocket, and you keep moving around to spot anyone speak in the vernacular or English, and then you pass on the disc to them, and then they will carry it on looking for someone else and pass it on for the whole day. And at the end of the day, the whole chain of those that were passing on the disc would go ahead, would get a beating, they would be beaten or, ashamed in one way or the other for doing that. Imagine. And now growing up and coming to be inspired with my own Africanness and blackness, I look back into that and I see a shame. Not only a shame, but I see the psychological agenda that took place back many, many years before I was born. And I just feel so sad for my people. So today in this video, let's talk about the subjugation that we've gone through at the hands of these colonialists. So I have a few points I want us to knock off. I don't know what you have written for yourself, what you've had for yourself. We can use my few points here, to go through this. So I have a few points written down here. Now, let's go through these 3 points. One, language as a tool of control. And then we'll go number two, culture as a means of domination. And then let's talk about psychological and social impact of all this. Now, language as a tool of control. Now, let me read out for you this. So there was the imposition of English or imposing English on us. Now, that was what was happening in our schools or still happens to date. So the British made English the official language of their colonies entirely, replacing our own African languages in administration, in education, and even in social spaces, in social mobility. These alienated people, black people, from their own cultures and cultural heritage and made access to power dependent on adopting English and British ways. Because if all the power is stored in English, because your language carries power and carries your culture, now you will have to be practicing the culture of the language to whom which the culture, you will be practicing the culture of the person to whom which has given you the language. There was suppression of indigenous languages, deliberate suppression of our own African languages. So local languages were often dismissed. They called them unfit, primitive, and backward, and not for intellectual discourse, intellectual spaces, limiting the development of those African languages and forcing people to learn English for any kind of progress or any kind of upward mobility. If you want to elevate yourself or become of any other a different social class, then you have to look like them, to practice their language, to know and practice their language. Then we have education itself as indoctrination. So British designed educational systems taught colonial subject to see their own history as inferior. I mean, to make us as black people see our own history as inferior and Britain as the pinnacle of civilization, the beginning of all civilization. So schools omitted indigenous knowledge and history while glorifying what? British and British achievements. So sad. Let's look at culture as a means of domination because culture and language are two inseparable things. Christianity and moral justification. So, missionary activities spread Christianity, replacing traditional religious and spiritual practices. And I have talked about this before in not one, but a couple of videos before. Christian doctrine was often framed in a way that justified colonial rule, sadly, and portraying British governance as a civilizing mission. Um, Christianity in itself does more than just teach people about God, but it also teaches people about power and power dynamics. I have said that before. Let's talk a little bit about Western dress and Western customs, Western clothing and customs. So the British imposed Western clothes or clothing and etiquette, framing them as more civilized than traditional attire and customs. These created divisions where those who embraced British culture were seen as superior to those who held African indigenous traditions. That's why we dumped all our ways of dressing just to adopt someone else's way of dressing. We didn't bother to question why is it that mine is unacceptable and yours is acceptable. I don't have a problem with someone else practicing their own way of life, but forcing that on me and trying to make mine look like subhuman or making theirs look like superhuman is where my problem begins. Let's talk a little bit about the erasure of or erasing of indigenous African knowledge. So, African history, medicine, and governance or government systems were very and severely undermined. Oral traditions, which carried historical truths, were labeled unreliable, while British written history became the dominant narrative. Clearly, what these people knew very well, and for us black people, I often say, and I have said this before, that we were defeated where it mattered the most, right here. It was a psychological agenda. We had our ways of religion and spirituality, let me call it. We had our own understanding of the divine. We had our spiritual means, and we had our own means of knowledge. We had medicine. We had our own forms of civilizations. In fact, civilization, to be honest, started in Africa. But when they first came, the first thing they did was to erase that, was to call it primitive, was to tell you how your religion is backward and wrong, how your ways of understanding God are dangerous and are going to lead you to a certain fire, and that you had to listen to what they tell you. Your clothes, your language, your knowledge is very, very primitive. After telling you that, after making sure that they separate you to what really makes you who you are, and then now they can make you who they want you to be. Point number 3. Let's talk about the psychological and social impact of this. So self-alienation and inferiority complex. So many colonized people internalize the idea that their languages, their cultures, and our traditions were inferior, creating long-term psychological damage. Even after independence, the so-called independence, what we have today as countries of black people, many post-colonial nations continued prioritizing English over native languages. Tell me a country in Africa, in the Caribbeans, that have embraced speaking an African language in their formal systems. We're either speaking English or French in Africa. If you're not speaking French, you're backward, you're primitive, you're uneducated, you're of low social status. So you have to speak English, you have to speak French, you have to speak Spanish, Portuguese, or a certain European language. In Kenya, we just adopted a new constitution in 2010. Prior to that, we used what the British left. And even what we have today still has deep, deep traces of colonial legacy in it. We haven't really overhauled it. That's why in our parliaments, in our 2 houses of parliament, English is the dominant language. And if one member of parliament comes to the podium to speak in Swahili, she is deemed as maybe not very well educated. Their point might not be as strong as such. I mean, it's shameful that we still hold on to that, a colonial mindset. So let's talk about the divide and rule. So the British strategically divided communities along linguistic and cultural lines to weaken our own resistance towards them. In Africa, for example, ethnic groups were historically cooperative. Um, Sorry, let me reread that. In Africa, for example, ethnic groups that were historically cooperative were turned against each other through differential treatment and access to resources. They made us fight one another, and in the midst of the fight amongst ourselves, among us, within ourselves, they took all the time to steal, to embezzle, to vandalize, to unalive us, and to just take advantage of us. And then the colonial mentality in modern subjugation. So even today, former British colonies, and this also goes as far as even for the French colonies, struggle with the remnants of colonial indoctrination. English, and of course French and all other um, European languages spoken by Black people, English and all those are still the language of power, and Western cultural standards remain dominant and kind of like the accepted standards of prowess, of higher social class, of education and intelligence, so on and so forth. I think it is time for us to adopt our own African languages into our own systems of education. In fact, overhaul the whole whitewashed system of education. Retell our own stories from our own perspective in our own languages. Teach our own languages before, and this is a ticking time bomb, before they're lost and gone forever. Languages die naturally. All languages are born and languages die. And a language dies because there are no speakers of that language. So if our languages continue to starve from the lack of people that speak it, then those languages will die. And guess what will die? Our history. Guess what will also do the same? Our ways of life. And guess what? The ultimate of it all, we also will vanish, like our languages, our culture, our knowledge. So it is time for us to start telling our stories in our own languages, to start practicing our own culture. See, look at how shameful this story is. Even today, as kids and children are born to and of Black parents, the first thing they do, even before the baby is born, is to go to the internet or to brainstorm on what are the best European names to give to the kids, to the children. Why don't we give our children our own names, names of our own heroes? Let's glorify ourselves. Nobody is coming to glorify us. Nobody is coming to appreciate us if we, as Black people, in and out of the African continent, don't appreciate ourselves. Nobody is coming to save us. I have always said, everybody has themselves to worry about. Nobody else is worried about you. Let nobody lie to you that they care about you. Nobody cares about you, my brother and my sister. Nobody cares about you. You should care about yourself, and you should care about your own brother. Give, if we love to glorify our own heroes, give our kids, our newborns, names of our own heroes. Name our roads and our physical features. Give them, if we must give them names, give them the names of our heroes. That is the beginning of the colonization of the mind. Okay, so I think we have come to the end of this part one of this video, and as I said from the beginning, we had a part two of this video, and the part two is simple, short, and very sweet. And so months ago, I was inspired by what's going on around the world and everything around us today. And the inspiration gave birth to a channel, a YouTube channel. And the channel is this. It's called AfriSite. And I thought it was necessary to tell African stories from an African perspective. And I believe that that carries more weight. And I believe that is how it should be. Telling our own stories in our own way, from our own perspective. See, the thing is, even in this video, as we talk about the need for us to uh, know our own languages, teach, speak in our own languages, and practice our own culture. It is ironical that even in this video, we probably are using the language of the imperialist, because that is the only way I can reach out to as many of my black people as possible, because we know we're spread and dispersed all over each part of the world. We can use this as a lingua franca, as a language, as a means and a tool of communication to bring to knowledge what really happened, what got us here. So then, before I deviate, so I was inspired and I said, let me start this channel so we could try to tell our stories. We could try to give our voice. We could try to talk to Black people about what is happening in the world, what is going on from a geopolitical perspective. And we're probably not always right in our perspectives. But I believe in one thing. We might not be right, but we are not malicious. Because whoever that has been telling our stories has been telling the story from an intentionally malicious perspective. I might be wrong in my perspective in some of or most of my videos, but the intention behind it is not that of malice. Because why would I be malicious to my own self? So, in the course of this week, this channel finally hit 1,000 subscribers. With the efforts of your contributions in whichever way, watching of these videos, liking these videos, the comments you have given, each single view, like, comment, and share has been the fuel or the gas that has propelled me to go on one video at a time. So, with a heart full of gratitude, I thought it necessary to say in this video a big, big thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of you, for all of us, for such a milestone that we got to today. And now the road to 10,000 subscribers has begun. Let's tell our stories one single video at a time. Thank you very much for all the support you have shown this channel. Let's continue to grow together. Continue to share this with your friends, with your family, with your loved ones, with everybody else possibly possible. And we have come to the end of this video. I'm so happy. I'm so elated. I'm so pumped with so much energy to go on. So definitely, I will be so happy to see you in my next video. So until next time, see you in the next video. One love. Peace out.